Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I'm Andy Genzer, a member of the Cape Women's Coalition, and I'm here to welcome all of you to our session on housing this morning. Towns and housing, what's going on in your backyard? The Cape Women's Coalition's been around for about 8 years, if you haven't heard of us, and we're focused on engaging women civically and in public life. And we hope today is an exciting discussion with our wonderful speakers. And to get us going, I'm going to introduce Andrea Aldana, who is our moderator for the day, and then she will introduce our speakers and take us from there. Andrea is currently the Director of Housing Advocacy at the Community Development Partnership, often called the CDP. And she's also a member of the Board and Policy Leadership Council of Citizens Housing and Planning Association, or CHAPA. And last year was on the mass delegation to Ireland that was looking at affordable housing. So as you can see, we've got somebody with quite a lot of experience on this issue, along with 4 other women who are going to knock your socks off. So with that said, I will introduce Andrea and let her take it from there. You'll see me again when we move into the questions section. Thanks. Oh,
good morning. Yeah, I'm just going to turn it over to Courtney for a quick second before I get started to talk about some guidelines.
Sure. Thank you so much, both of you. Good morning, everybody, and welcome. So I'm Courtney Butler. I'm just going to go over some quick technical things with you. So we will be asking participants to keep their videos off for the duration of the meeting. And while we do that, just to keep the speakers and panelists visible, we also ask that you put your Zoom view into speaker view. It's a personal preference really, but that way you can see the speakers as they are talking. And you are all muted. And then the way that the chat function will work is for Q&A. So send any questions you have in there. We just ask that you don't use it as a way to communicate back and forth and have sidebar chit chat. If you have questions, throw them in there and we'll get to those later on in the program. I'm just gonna throw up a slide really quick about etiquette. So again, you're all gonna be muted, videos off. We'll answer questions later on during the program. And this just shows you where the little chat button is here. And then you can place them in gallery view if you want to see everybody all at once. And this program is being recorded. It's also live on Facebook right now. So you can go back and watch it later or share it with people if you'd like. All right, thank you, Andrea, and back to you.
Thank you, Courtney and Andy. All right, so I am honored to be supporting this important conversation. Today, we're talking about access to a home on Cape Cod and why it's important, why it's challenging, and why it can be attainable if we all play a part. We're going to be using the term housing as shorthand, but it's just really easy to forget that when we're talking about housing, we're really talking about homes for our families, friends, and neighbors. So to kick us off, I just want to talk a little bit about why we have a housing crisis. The most basic explanation is that we have inadequate land use policies on the Cape that encourage sprawl by favoring single-family homes on 1-acre lots, which we see a lot of. And on top of that, we have really high land values. So those homes that we do have are way out of reach for many year-round Cape Codders. We can change these policies. That doesn't happen at town meeting in most towns. And so that creates a really challenging regulatory environment in which to develop housing. Plus, the creation of affordable housing in the region has been stymied by community resistance, otherwise known as NIMBYism. In case you're not familiar with that term, it stands for not in my backyard. We have a saying in the field that says that everyone supports affordable housing until it has an address, and that just keeps being true. So the housing crisis is really a complex problem. It requires multiple solutions, and we're going to talk about both sides of this equation right now. So let's dive in and hear from our speakers about which housing issues are most important for us to understand first. Hi, Hilda. Can you please introduce yourself and let us know which housing issue feels most pressing to you?
Good morning, everybody. My name is Hilda Hay, and I'm part of the Barnstable Committee, Housing Committee. Housing on a whole is very important on the Cape, and as a person who have experienced a little bit of homelessness at some point in the past, in the past I've experienced what it is to be homeless. And as a strong advocate, I am here And I'm here to encourage us to build support for new housing on the Cape or any housing initiatives that are available to us in the town of Barnstable and surrounding towns. There's never been more apparent that housing and healthcare is tied together. And in the midst of this COVID-19, housing has become more of a public health issue. And the Center for Disease Control, which is the CDC, has a ban that will be expiring in December 31st, 2020. And at that point in time, when we are bracing for impact, we are bracing because we know that a lot of eviction will be taking places. And around this country, we're all feeling it, not only on the Cape, but I'm here to say, the question I'm asking is, what can we do as a community to help each other? What can we do to build more housing? How can we accommodate people that are living here, especially our young people? How can we help them to live in affordable housing? Or how can they be part of the housing structure? I want to use this forum to, ask homeowners. I know it is hard on both sides of the coin, having to pay mortgage, and a lot of us are out of work and are unable to pay our rents, but I'm asking, using this momentum to plead to homeowners to be lenient with your tenants as best as possible, so that we can have less homelessness in our communities, because it will affect us down the road even more severely. And with COVID-19, a lot of us, millions of us throughout this country, are waking up this morning wondering, am I going to be able to pay my rent for the upcoming months? What are we going to do? What is my family going to do this morning? And COVID-19 has pushed housing to the forefront. Right now, it is dire. It is a dire need for people to have housing, not only housing, but to keep their family together. And so in this real estate market, things are really taking a turn for the local people who live here on the Cape. The prices have increased drastically for houses. And if you're lucky, when there's a house goes up for sale, you are outbid by people who can afford cash. Right now, cash is king on the Cape or throughout this country, I could imagine, where you're outbidden 3-4 times, or you're outbidden if for example, a place is put up for 100,000, somebody's offering 110,000. So the working poor, as I put it in my own term, cannot compete in this market. They don't have a lot of chances getting somewhere to buy. Or to rent right now, there's not much availability. And so before the houses hit the market, they're all gone. And I'm not sure how we are going to handle it immediately right now. The long term, we can plan and we can continue to build. There is a lot of great organizations in our community that are doing very well, helping with building, with construction. I mean, Habitat of Humanity, the town of Barnstable, the different towns are trying very hard.
I'm gonna just stop you right there. You brought up a lot of points, and I think people need to kind of absorb them a little bit. I know we're gonna be talking about a lot of what you brought up as we keep going in the conversation, but I'm really glad that you brought up the COVID connection, because it reminds me that there's this myth that's been circulating that affordable housing increases COVID cases. It started in Boston, it's been spreading through all the cities across the country, and I've even seen it make its way to Truro. So I just want to address it here really quickly. So the issue is that a lot of people are confusing density with crowding. So when you don't have enough housing that people can afford, they might be forced to live with more people than they would like to, and that can spread the virus. But when we have enough housing for everybody, that means that people can be appropriately housed and avoid crowding and stay safe indoors. So having more housing stock is actually an antidote to the spread of COVID. And we should be really using this moment to grab people's attention and convert more people into supporters of housing development. So thank you, Hilda. I'm just going to move us along. Let's hear from Elaine next. Elaine, can you please introduce yourself and let us know which housing issue feels most pressing to you?
Good morning, everybody. It's really great to be here with you today. I'm Elaine McElroy, and I've been involved with affordable housing efforts for about 15 years as a member of the Wellfleet Housing Authority. This is a volunteer position, so I'm speaking to you as a volunteer, encouraging you to be a volunteer, and I can say for me it's been a 15-year-long learning experience, and that continues. So I love taking advantage of opportunities like this to keep learning, and especially to be here with this panel today. And just to build on what Hilda said and what Andrea said, one of my concerns out of many is our housing market today. It is a hot housing market. That is no exaggeration. I'm sure you have all been reading the headlines about it. And as Hilda said, it is right now, the situation is directly related to COVID. We have no idea how long it's going to last, and it is yet another disruption to the health and well-being of our community. So even before COVID, though, I think we know that our housing market has been really disconnected from our economy, from the lives of our workforce, all across the board. As a beautiful tourist destination, we are really dependent on a lot of jobs in the service economy, and we always will be, and the pay is not great. But in today's market, even people with better paying jobs, teachers, health professionals, health and safety are not able to achieve home ownership. And we really have almost, I know in Wellfleet, we have a 0 rate of rentals. So it's really seems imperative that we step up our efforts. There is a lot going on across the Cape, which you will hear about today. But I do just want to emphasize, I thought this was only, I knew it was a problem in Wellfleet where 2/3 of our homes are seasonal homes. But I have, in doing research, I've learned all across the Cape, this is something we're dealing with. You know, our beautiful Cape is so appealing to so many people as second homes, but also the explosion of the short-term rental market. And as Hilda and Andrea alluded to, our zoning history and the situation with our infrastructure. But since April, we have seen in every town across the Cape just an incredible disruption of the market. I think in the resources that you'll be given today, there's a link to a site called Fast Stats, which you can look at and see what's happening all across Barnstable County and in your own towns. Prices of homes, not only homes, single family homes, but condos have increased from at least $100,000 in some towns to over $300,000. There are fewer homes on the market than there have ever been, and they're selling fast, as you've heard. in Wellfleet, we're very fortunate to have a couple of very caring realtors on our housing authority and on our housing trust. And at recent meetings, they really talked about their concern of our local young people not having a chance at these homes. Many of them aren't quite prepared, and they talked about the need to do more to get young people ready to be home buyers. And so that's certainly something we can do, and there are efforts, but one of our realtors offered to make like a 10-minute promo video that will go on our town website, or it could be further, for anybody, just to really give sort of the high points of what young people need to start doing to get ready, to tell them about all the home buyers courses. And just to finish up, one thing we have done in Wellfleet is we have a buy down program with community preservation funds. And we actually give a $175,000 grant to buy down the cost of a home. It puts a deed restriction on it. So over the past 10 years, we've been able to add 6 new deed restricted homes. So that is one positive, but it's just one of the pieces that we can put together.
Thank you, Elaine. All right, let's hear from Shauna. Shauna, can you please tell us who you are and what do you think is most important for everyone to understand?
Hi, I'm Shauna Mose. I am Vice President of Operations and Strategic Initiatives at Housing Assistance Corporation, also known as HAC. So a lot of people know us as HAC, HAC. What I wanted to talk about today, a lot of people have touched on, which is the importance of housing for economic sustainability for our community. So sometimes we talk about it as economic development. And one of the things that housing assistance does is really try to address the way people communicate about housing. Andrea mentioned it before. People are afraid of the word density, and they're afraid of the word development because they say we don't want to build more multifamily houses. We don't want to have more development because we don't want Cape Cod to change. And I think the important thing for everyone to know is Cape Cod is changing. The median home price is $489,000 right now, which means to afford it, you have to make $125,000 a year. Okay, and our young people are disappearing. We cannot build new business here because imagine if you wanted to try to start a new business here and you had to pay every single person who worked in your business $125,000 a year so that they could afford to live here. It just can't be done. So when people say we don't want to change our Cape Cod community, I think it's really important for us to come back to say it is changing. And if we don't proactively decide what kind of community we want to build, we're going to lose it. We're going to lose our sustainability. Imagine if you had to pay your home health care worker $125,000 a year in order to attract them here. They're not going to drive off Cape to come for a $15 an hour job. So these are the things that, I try to remind people and think of those stories. We've all been to restaurants before COVID where there was a line out the door and there was an empty section. And there was an empty section because the restaurant owner cannot find workers to service that area because they can't afford to live here. So think of those examples. Think of the people who work at the restaurants year round. We're not just talking about seasonal workers. And COVID has just pulled back the curtain on all of this. The people who, our workforce usually work all summer at 2 jobs. Again, $15 an hour is about $30,000 a year. So your landscapers, your people who work at the grocery store, the people who work at the restaurants, they're making $30,000 a year. They have to work 2 or 3 jobs, or they have to be in a couple in order to afford to live here. And, with COVID, that went away. And so it just really brought it to the surface. If we want to have a place for our young people, if we want to attract some new businesses that are appropriate to Cape Cod, we need to have more housing. And the other thing I would say is remember those cute little village centers that we love. We all like to walk downtown Provincetown. We like to walk downtown Chatham. Those could not be built under the zoning that we have today, right? That's density. It's adorable. It's walkable, it's walkable downtown villages. We like it. You know, so again, it's trying to get people over that fear and that idea that our community is changing and we can decide how we want it to change things.
Thank you, Shauna. Yeah, I think Provincetown is one of the most dense towns in Massachusetts. So that should be our new tagline. Density is adorable. All right, let's move to Mary. Mary, please introduce yourself. Let us know which issue is most pressing to you.
Sure. Good morning. My name is Mary Wagan. I work for the town of Yarmouth. At the town, I am the Affordable Housing Program Administrator. I live in Mashpee, and I sit on the Planning Board in Mashpee and on the Community Preservation Committee. And through these experiences, one of the most pressing issues that I've identified in housing production is wastewater infrastructure. So as many of you know, I can see from all your names that some of you work in the housing industry or volunteer in it. And, you know, I'm sure that you're familiar with all the barriers that we hit and come upon when we're trying to develop housing and affordable housing. And that could be, you know, restrictive zoning. We have sensitive wetlands here on the Cape, beautiful coastal resources. That basically gives us a huge lack of buildable land. And we also have a lack of infrastructure and wastewater in particular. So, you know, the residents of Yarmouth have been extremely supportive on all these issues. You know, they've changed their zoning to allow and require affordable housing. They've put up a lot of money to subsidize the development of affordable housing. And we've all come to the agreement that, you know, we're not going to build on wetlands or our coastal barriers to create affordable housing. So that's off the table. But one place that the town has really identified that we could make some progress is wastewater infrastructure. So, you know, there is a plan in town to sewer, you know, Route 28. It's one of the primary areas for wastewater infrastructure. And, you know, the town is hoping that with that new wastewater infrastructure, perhaps in combination with some new zoning, you know, it would allow appropriate growth. And, you know, the option of doing, you know, we can't do nothing. That doing nothing is not an option, right? Because you're just letting the market take care of itself. And it sometimes needs some help, right? It needs some infrastructure, it needs some money, that kind of stuff. And with no public wastewater infrastructure, affordable housing developments are forced to provide their own on-site wastewater facility. And that drives up the cost and that drives up the required number of units. And you could, in that instance, kind of miss that mid-range of density that Cape Codders are comfortable with. You know, we right now in Yarmouth are, and I'm going to talk about it a little bit more later on in the presentation, we have 2 developments on Route 28. They're affordable housing developments and they both have on-site wastewater treatment facilities. And when we were negotiating the number of units on these sites, the cost of wastewater, the on-site wastewater treatment facility was an issue that bumped up the number of units. So we would just want to avoid, you know, having this lack of wastewater infrastructure be an exclusionary factor for the development of housing. I mean, we need housing and we need clean waters. So hopefully as all these sewer proposals come up in your town, you know, maybe you should ask that question, you know, how is this going to impact the housing market? Is it going to allow more affordable housing? And if those answers are acceptable to you, hopefully you'll support, you know, the sewering in your town.
Thanks, Mary. So in case it's not obvious, those of us who work in housing can talk about housing all day. And we could just make this issue more and more complicated, but let's not do that. I think I've heard you all offer 6 really solid high-level issues that have the greatest impact on housing. I heard that access to housing is a critical public health matter. I heard that there are a lot of challenges in our hot real estate market, which is getting hotter with COVID. How the lack of housing affects our economy and workforce, and the importance of wastewater management on our ability to build. And another issue that I think is really important to bring up is, again, this conversation about density, but in the context of design. So a lot of times when we hear residents get upset about the number of units, people decide that X number of units is too much for this spot or, you know, that development. The language they use tends to kind of focus on how the buildings look. They don't like that it's a big building or just other features of it. So we can kind of reframe this density conversation by helping folks have a more creative vision of what housing can look like, because there's a lot of beautiful examples out there. Affordable and attainable housing should be just as beautiful as any other type of housing. It should absolutely fit into our communities. And it should be built with the future in mind, right? The number of units and the demographics of its residents really shouldn't matter. So one way of dealing with this is form-based code. If folks are interested in learning more about that, maybe we can talk about it later in the Q&A. So anyways, the good news is that despite the complexity of our housing problem, we actually know how to solve it. We know because the housing crisis is not unique to Cape Cod. It's actually a national crisis. And we've seen innovative solutions from across the country and frankly from around the world, but we'll try and keep it local today. So let's talk about the good stuff. Let's talk about some strategies that Cape Cod towns have used to increase our housing stock and support a year-round rental market. So why don't we talk about policy solutions? Hilda, I think you had an idea you wanted to share.
Thank you. Well, for example, HAC has done a wonderful job on Ridgewood Avenue, that plot of land, and the new apartments that were put in there. That spot has been vacant for a very long time, and it's a while, but it is there. It's a beautiful buildings that we have there, and I think our town is helping, but I think there's a more urgent cry right now for us to get more support from the town with zoning law. As Mary has suggested before, Elaine has suggested, a couple of our other speakers have suggested that, I mean, changing our zoning law would help tremendously in advocating for more density and for us to have, I mean, probably some more triple deckers around so we can accommodate multifamilies and better water treatment. I mean, probably we'll be able to do some water treatment on the property on site or get connecting to the sewer. I mean, there's a ton of stuff that we can do, and I think the town needs to move faster. We're lagging behind. Yarmouth is doing a wonderful job. And I think sometimes I feel so jealous about Yarmouth moving ahead of us. And I know Elaine has spoken about it. Mary's over there, and I think Barnstable is definitely lagging behind, and I think we need to move a little bit faster on that. And in the sense, how can we attract more developers? Right. What can we do to help the developers to get in here and it's not taking them 2 years and the expense double or triple in that 2 years when we could have gotten the work done?
Right. Yeah, Mary, you have a great Yarmouth example. You want to tell us a little bit what you've done with zoning there?
Sure. So, every town has a property or an area that needs a little help, right? So the town identified Route 28 as one of those areas. So cleverly, they really wanted to advocate for redevelopment, and we were able to use affordable housing development as a tool for that through our motel bylaw. And so this was, a big change in our zoning bylaw. It allowed density of up to 16 to 22 units per acre, three stories in some areas. And, the town also put some money up to help developers come in and attract developers into town. And, what the town gained was affordable housing and attractive redevelopment, because we had architectural standards, as required. We also got less traffic because we were replacing motel use with residential use. And we got better wastewater management because, as I mentioned before, these had to have on-site wastewater treatment facilities. So that was kind of like a clever tool to use zoning and affordable housing money in combination to meet an economic development goal of the town. So it's resulted in 2 developments and 109 affordable units on Route 28. So one is Yarmouth Commons, that's in South Yarmouth, and the other one is under construction right now. It's Yarmouth Gardens, and that's 40 affordable apartment units. It's at 497 Route 28. Don't go on the site, but I'm just giving you the address so you can drive by and see the construction. And hopefully that will be done in about 13 to 15 months. And watch for the affordable housing lottery applications to be available in about 6 to 8 months.
Thanks, Mary. And that's thanks to your super hard work in Yarmouth. And Shauna, Hilda brought up the Ridgewood Avenue example. You want to talk about that a little bit more?
Yes, thanks. So Ridgewood Avenue is an area in Hyannis, just outside of Main Street. It's very close to the hospital, and it's what we call a transitional zone. And what I wanted to bring up about that is it's an example of these smaller, they call them community scale development. And this is, again, I'm trying to get people over that fear of affordable housing units. They don't have to all be in big buildings if the town supports them and the infrastructure supports them. So we call it a pocket neighborhood. This neighborhood was zoned for single family homes, and nobody wanted to build a single family home in this particular transition zone, right? There's a lot of the transportation center and other stuff around there. And it was vacant for almost 20 years, but we got the town to give us a variance and we made a pocket neighborhood. So it's 3 little townhouse buildings that around a central lawn that creates 8 units. And 6 of them are market rate and 2 of them are deed restricted affordable. And it's just been lovely. I mean, they filled in right at the beginning. They're all young professionals who are living there, and they all have pets. So anyway, it's just a really nice little community there in something that was a little bit of a blight for people to walk by. So I wanted to give that example, but it took us a long time because even though the town supported it, like Hilda was saying, we didn't have, and Mary was saying, we didn't have the underlying zoning to do it. So we had to get exception after exception after exception to do it. So you can do community scale, you can do cute, And the other example I wanted to give is what Falmouth is working on. They're working on, it's a little bit like form-based code. Some people are afraid of that term because they think it's too complicated, but it's basically an overlay on existing zoning. And what they want to do is if a property is already zoned commercial, that they will allow up to 6 units, per acre on commercially zoned property and with design review. So as long as the design fits within the scale of the neighborhood and the existing buildings, then you could turn what is underutilized commercial property into housing. And that makes a lot of sense, right? We've all driven by those buildings, those commercial buildings that are vacant for years. And COVID has only made that happen more. Those are probably not going to come back and be really busy, crowded stores, right? So we have an opportunity with underutilized commercial property. Let's just use those existing buildings. There's a lot of opportunity there where we don't have to develop open space, and in order to, with rezoning, basically you got to zone for what you want. It's not naturally occurring. So we have to really, like everyone else was saying, is think about where do we want housing and then zone to attract it.
Yeah, absolutely. So zoning is probably one of the most critical tools we have to promote housing development. And there's a lot of other things that towns can be doing to set themselves up for success. Mary, you mentioned that Yarmouth put money in. You want to talk a little bit about money?
Sure. So, right. So step 1, what the town did was, added some zoning to attract redevelopment and attract affordable housing development. And that stalled for a little bit. And then one of our members of the Affordable Housing Trust said, hey, why don't we just put up $1 million? Let's put up $1 million and see if we can get a developer interested. And so guess what? We did. So, if your town wants to drive the bus, right, on this stuff, put the money up. You issue the money with your procurement officer, you figure that out. And in exchange, you can ask for, the energy efficiency that you want at these developments, the architecture or the form-based code that you want, the landscaping, the site design, what do you want inside these living units for people? Like we always ask for extra storage, so stuff doesn't get stored outside, that kind of stuff. On-site playgrounds, community rooms, that kind of stuff. So just keep that in mind, that it's not just a per dollar per unit figure that you're grappling with. Is you're really going to give yourself the control you need to get the development you want.
Yeah, that's a really great point. And just to kind of bring it home for folks, what are some really basic examples? When we're talking about money, what are we talking about? Where's this money coming from? Hilda, and I think you and I had talked about CPA and some other revenue sources that towns are using.
Yeah, so the town does have like CPA monies
What does
that,
that
and
mean?
the town, we do get grants from the state. And I think that those are a good example.
Hilda, what
So
does CPA stand for? Community Preservation Act money, right? We talked about it before, but it's so easy for us in housing to use acronyms. So we just have to be really careful that we're not doing that to all of you. But yeah, CPA is one of the most important sources of local funds for sure.
Yes, thank you, Andrea. I was breaking up there for a second. Thank you. And as the different town, I think all the towns on the Cape now, I think we need to start with not thinking of just about each town, but cooperate each town on the Cape and see what we can do, extend to each other a helping hand. Where like Yarmouth, Mary has been ahead of the game, and the town of Yarmouth, you know, to see where we can get ideas and help from them, building other communities. So, because the most important thing at the end of the day is having more housing. It doesn't matter which community it is in or where the location is. It's just having more houses so our families can feel safe, our young professionals can stay here and afford to stay here. And just other means of ways of, you know, attracting our developers to come in and do some other job. There, I think there's, and I think one way of doing that is the town will allow some of the town lands to be used, like Mary said, to be used for development, and I'm sure that would cost less.
Right, yeah, that's a really good point. So we're talking about like all the different types of resources, right? The towns can be offering up to support housing. It's not just money, it's also land. And I know, Mary, you and I had a chat last week about the state's role. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Right. So I just don't want, you know, we have a lot of, we can have a big influence in our town with the Community Preservation Fund, those, you know, short-term rental taxes, tax on marijuana, that kind of stuff. But, you know, I've been so impressed by the state's housing budget, and especially during COVID, how they've really stepped up to the plate and are really concerned about keeping people housed and putting money into the voucher system and all that stuff. And just whenever you interact, I just encouraging everybody, whenever you interact, or, you know, you can send letters to the governor and your state rep and your state senators, you know, keep that item on the top of their list, the housing budget, because it really made things move in Yarmouth. And Hilda, I want to let you know, when I started working for Yarmouth, it was all bounceable. So we've caught up.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. So, but really all that state money and the low-income housing tax credits and all these big fancy financial mechanisms are super important. So whenever you interact with your state elected officials, just keep that on always in every conversation you have with them. Thanks.
I agree with you, Mary. We have to keep that on the forefront.
We will. All right, so we talked about wastewater a little bit before, but let's talk about the strategy side of that. How can wastewater be critical to promoting housing development?
So yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit about that because, again, another one of the things that we hear in the community when we talk about housing is that our wastewater can't handle it, our water quality can't handle it. Additional housing is going to be bad for the environment. And so housing assistance is in partnership with the Association to Preserve Cape Cod. And we are working with the Cape Cod Commission data and the APCC data on water quality to make more of an integrated plan. And I can say, don't accept that. Don't accept that when people try that argument. It's a specious argument that, you know, environmental protection and housing cannot go hand in hand. So APCC is very much in favor of moderate density housing development in appropriate locations because it drives down the cost per unit for wastewater. And it reduces our need to develop on open space. Right now, our zoning promotes sprawl. It promotes people building big houses on big lots, which means more roads, more disruption to the open spaces. So we're working together to kind of highlight the areas where they want to see larger intact tracts of open space, which is great for water runoff and filtration. It's great for the animals, you know, all that kind of stuff. And then they want to see more wastewater treatment being developed. And that is going to be affordable if we tie it in with housing. So again, it's trying to use that same town dollar to achieve two goals. We're getting more people on sewer, and we are promoting the denser development that's going to keep our open space open. So it's a 2-year project that we're doing, and we're using the commission data to say these are activity centers where we could have adorable. I know I keep saying adorable, but I'm like, density is adorable. I don't know. People need to know this. But we can have these village centers that are really active. They're walkable. They're appropriate for workforce. They're appropriate for seniors who want to downsize. They're appropriate for young professionals. So we can have those really rich communities. And so when you go to town meetings and people say our wastewater, our environment cannot handle more housing, it's simply not true. We need to do it smartly, and we need to do it together. We cannot afford not to do wastewater treatment. Even if we built not a single more unit, we still need wastewater treatment because our water quality needs it. So while we're building wastewater treatment for water quality, let's make it work for housing too.
Right, yeah, absolutely. And of course, in case it's not obvious, a really critical strategy to having more housing is actually building it, right? Actual housing development. And the idea of partnership and collaboration has come up a couple of times now. And I know that there are some examples of towns working together with developers. Mary, did you have an example that Yarmouth has used around that?
Yes, so with our local affordable housing zoning in Yarmouth, what happened was, some of our local developers all of a sudden, wanted to take advantage of this, but knew nothing about affordable housing and all the rules and regs. So we decided to provide technical support. And one stumbling block right away we identified was the affordable housing lottery. So there's lots of rules and regulations, and these are all based on how you select your tenant and how you select your affordable buyer, and it's to avoid discrimination in housing. So it's a really important part of the whole housing market. And so long story short, the town of Yarmouth administers the Cape Cod Ready Renter lottery and waitlist. So it's an affirmatively and fairly marketed and fairly administered program. So right now we support 70 affordable rental units. These are in Falmouth, Barnstable, Yarmouth, Dennis, and Orleans. So if you in your work come upon a developer who all of a sudden has to, provide an affordable rental unit, struggling with the lottery, give Yarmouth a call. We might be a good match for that.
Thank you, Mary. Yeah, it's a really good point that we can be making it a lot easier for developers to be building in our towns by working together. This theme of collaboration is also really important between towns, right? So a lot of neighboring towns have really similar challenges, and they need to maximize their resources. So working together on housing makes a lot of sense, right? Since it benefits, since it benefits the region overall. Elaine, you have a little experience with regional collaboration, don't you?
I do. I actually, in my 34 years of my work life as the director of the Wellfleet Library, I benefited greatly from our wonderful CLAMS library system, which is a model of collaboration. And really put me in touch with people in every town on the Cape. And that was really so valuable that I sort of used it to reach out for my interest in housing too. And so we have been very fortunate on the Lower Cape, that's Harwich to Provincetown, to have worked with the Community Development Partnership and with Andrea. They have pulled our 8 towns together in such a wonderful way to support each other, to advocate, to educate. They do an amazing housing institute. And through that, I've met so many people. I mean, Wellfleet is a town that doesn't have anybody professional working on housing in our town, or even a town planner. So this collaboration amongst our 8 towns, and collaborations like today, where I've just scribbled down so many notes that I have to follow up on, are extremely valuable. And I know this was just talked about with reaching across town borders. In Wellfleet and in other towns, we have voted Community Preservation Act funds to support developments in other towns. Orleans and Wellfleet voted $100,000 each to Nauset Green and Eastham. And I have to say, doing that, going to the ribbon cutting, feeling such a part of that was really inspiring. Many towns in our area also supported the Cape Cod Village in Orleans, which is a home for young people with autism. And recently, this will go on our town meeting in the spring, Wellfleet is bringing to the people to vote on money to support the Veterans Home in Dennis. So we really, you know, the concept of the Cape as one Cape, we can learn so much from each other. And I know that our small town of Wellfleet has benefited greatly from collaborating and learning from everybody.
Thank you, Elaine. Yeah, and I'd also just add that the way that we do community engagement really matters, and we should really be using messaging that signals that we are welcoming communities that support diversity, especially racial diversity. Diversity has always mattered, but it matters even more now because we're in a moment where a lot of people are newly focused on embracing diversity, inclusion, and equity, and the fact that Black lives matter. And we should be weaving that language and understanding within throughout all of our efforts. So thank you all so much for your insights. You know, obviously the housing landscape is vast and we've only just scratched the surface, but luckily solutions are not mysterious. So if I can just recap, I think what I heard you all say is that we can basically solve the housing crisis if A, towns change their zoning bylaws to allow for more housing. So making it easier to build more units per acre, or building so-called in-law apartments is one way, but we need to be able to fit more housing on less land. And we can't do that unless we have wastewater infrastructure. So towns who are holding back on sewer are holding back our communities and our economy. And we also know that towns need to allocate more money for housing so we can get the best quality homes that we can possibly get here on the Cape, whether it's using existing revenue streams or being creative about finding new ones. And of course, we need to actually build more homes. This is a supply and demand issue. We have a ton of demand, but a meager supply to meet that demand. And we need it to fit within the look and feel of our neighborhoods while keeping energy and efficiency in mind and thinking about climate change, I would add. And finally, it sounds like we really need to be working together both at the town level and at the citizen level. So a lot's been done to address the housing crisis. We need a lot more housing though on a really short timeline if we want to support our healthy communities. What are some things that residents can do right now to support housing in their town?
I think for me, Andrew, I think if we have more residents joining different town committees, you don't have to be an expert. Like myself, I have no experience in all of this, but from my personal experience, as I've mentioned before, you know, being at one point in time where I was almost homeless, living with my children without my car, PAC was the one who rescued me. And after that, I made a conscious decision that anything concerning housing, I am there to volunteer. I'm helped to give wherever I can. I'll go to the meetings, whatever is possible, I will do. So for all of us who are out there listening and watching, you don't have to be an expert. Join a town committee, choose the one that you're passionate about. It doesn't have to be housing, but we're pushing housing right now. There are all different other groups that are on the Barnstable Town website, all our different town, Yarmouth Town website that needed people to volunteer to be a part of the decision making, especially our young people. We cannot sit back and wait on the elderly to make decisions that's going to affect the younger generation, your children, your grandchildren to come. So please join a committee.
Here, here. Thanks, Hilda. Shauna, what do you think?
Well, I would just add, I mean, even if you don't join the committee, start going to town meetings, you know, and again, you guys have all been on this call for 50 minutes now. You are hereby empowered to attend and to give comments because you don't have to be an expert. Again, we have to just draw the conversation back to the point that we need homes for the people who work here. Otherwise, our community is going to trickle out underneath us. And, you know, our community will change and we will lose our community if we don't build these homes. So I think we just need to, you know, even if people go down the rabbit hole of some sort of detail that you don't understand, you just bring it back to, okay, well, then what can we do to build some more homes for the people who work here? I also wanted to say that, you know, on the state level, there is things that we can do. Like the governor's housing choice bill is very important, and the biggest deal for that is, for me, is changing so that zoning changes can be changed at town meetings by a simple majority. Right now, the rule is that it has to be a super majority. So you can get 51%, you can get 55%, you know, voting in favor of a zoning change, and it won't pass because it's not a large enough majority. So if the governor's housing choice bill passes, then we'll be able to make these zoning changes much easier in the town with a simple majority. So, you know, do get behind that. I think it will really help in order to just make our governments move a little bit faster at the town level.
Thanks, Shauna. Elaine, any closing thoughts?
Well, I think it's also important to remember, as you said in the beginning, we're talking about our people, our neighbors, and homes for people, and to find more ways to engage the people who need the housing and encourage them to speak up and hear their stories. A lot of the things we've been talking about, wastewater and zoning, and this can be really overwhelming, but a personal story of someone that has benefited from housing can really be powerful. At our town meeting, when we were trying to pass the project of building up to 46 new rental units, which is huge for Wellfleet, the last person that spoke was one of our residents of one of our affordable apartments. And when she was done, we got a unanimous vote in favor.
That's awesome. Mary, any last thoughts to add?
You know, I just think that the two big things, you know, zoning wise, you know, or development wise, you know, is the concentrated, you know, developments that we're bringing online in Yarmouth, but also don't forget inclusionary zoning. If your town, as density is coming more and more into this conversation, don't forget to ask for some of those units to be automatically set aside for affordable housing. So, you know, if you're gonna, for every 10 units, get one affordable unit out of that. And not all towns on the Cape have inclusionary zoning. Yarmouth does, but my town of Mashpee doesn't, and I'm pushing for it. Yeah, that's my big ask here.
Thanks, Mary. Just to close us up, I really want to bring us back to this idea of how important it is for people to get involved in municipal government, because it's really important that the audience understand the power that you possess when you show up and speak up at a town board or committee meeting. Sometimes it really just takes one public comment to completely reshape a discussion or a meeting outcome. But, you know, the people who are providing the most input in these meetings are older white males, according to a recent study. We just can't let one slice of our demographic be the loudest voice, you know, in the room where it happens. So please use your voice and your vote to support housing for our neighbors every chance you get. So I think we have a couple bullet points we wanted to share with you all on a slide. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Is Maggie going to be sharing that on the screen?
I think Courtney perhaps is.
Yeah, so really just to condense it down, zoning is important. You need to support multifamily zoning by right. If there isn't an opportunity available right now, talk to your planning board about revisiting that. We need to be supporting municipal water and sewer. That's what we're talking about when we talk about infrastructure. And so you're never going to see on a housing agenda support housing, right? You're going to see zoning, you're going to see wastewater. These are sort of stand-ins for housing that you can support. And we need money. It takes a lot of money to build the beautiful housing that everybody says they want. And there's not a lot of money coming from the federal or state government. So we really need to provide that money locally. And lastly, make sure you get on a town board or committee, because those are the people making the decisions, and the people making decisions can and should be you and I and us. All right, so I think we're ready to move into the Q&A. Andy, are there any exciting burning questions that our experts here can address?
Sure. Courtney, if you don't mind taking that down, that'd be great. Hi, everybody. I'm Andy Genzer from the Cape Women's Coalition. I'm just going to curate some of these very lively questions that were in the chat. That was a really great discussion, you guys. And I would just say, as someone who's not steeped in housing like all of you, I think there might be a bumper sticker that says density is adorable coming out of this. And you all made so many really, really important points. But I think when I sort of listened to it all, the thing that I took away was this is a very interconnected set of issues here. That housing is healthcare, and it's about jobs, and it's about business. And so no matter which way you come at this, if you're somebody who runs a restaurant or you work or whatever, you have to care about this issue because they're all connected. And you guys gave us a lot of really great action steps we can take. And I think, you know, I think you also helped us understand that things like wastewater and zoning are really not so complicated as they seem. So I want to, you know, just move us into the questions. So the first question I wanted to throw out was, somebody asked the question of, is there a role for government and public ownership to increase the number and quality of affordable housing, not the private side? And I think you've addressed this a little bit, but just wanting to hear any other specific answers to that question. And I'll let Andrea, you decide who picks that one up, or you take it.
It's a good question. It's a vague question. I think I'm going to kick it to Shauna first.
Well, I would say it's interesting because, again, for Cape Cod, when you think of government-owned properties, you think big. I think big. That's what comes to my mind, is those larger housing developments. So in our case, housing assistance will we run the properties that are more community scale ourselves, that we've built as kind of, it's a public-private partnership, but you kind of don't want government running property. I mean, in a way that's not kind of core government business. And I get a little afraid of that becoming this huge, you know, monolithic management. And so when we do the larger low income tax credit projects, right? So we get state funding for that. They might be 30 or 40 units. We usually do them in partnership with the Preservation of Affordable Housing, which is a national organization that has expertise in building maintenance, tenant management, getting tenant services, all that kind of stuff. So when you think about all of the services and the support that you bring to affordable housing units, I think it's better done at a more local scale. I guess that's the thing. So, and I would say, given that our towns are mostly managed by often volunteers, like Elaine was saying, there's you know, Wellfleet housing is all done by volunteers. It's a lot to ask them to own and manage a property. So that's where it comes in with the nonprofit partners and the developer partnerships. And I think that works for us at our scale.
Great.
I guess if I could just add one little thing to that is money, right? So right now, there's more money to support housing at lower income levels, which is really important. But on the Cape and increasingly across the country, we also need housing for people who make, 100 to 120% AMI. People who have really good paying jobs still need affordable housing, and the pot of money to support that type of housing development is very small.
Okay, and Mary, did you want to add something?
Just quickly, the town of Yarmouth doesn't own any of the affordable housing that it develops because it starts to trigger procurement, which increases the development costs. So we tend to dispose of the resources, the land, the money, and have a private developer do it. I mean, we do have, I think Shauna mentioned it, housing authorities that are designed to create and own and administer housing. And that's a good part of the government to do that, but not sometimes the town isn't the best entity to do that.
Okay. Another question, some of this you've covered a little bit, but maybe for the sake of emphasis, we'll hear the answers. What changes are towns making to offer incentives for homeowners to create affordable units? And I was thinking about the project that Housing Assistance did a while ago about trying to encourage people to do rentals of their homes, and also for accessory dwelling units. So I don't know if that's who might want to take that, but I think it would be helpful to hear about, are there any incentives that people are offering at the town level to create more affordable units at an individual home basis?
I can talk a little bit about that. So what Housing Assistance did, again, this is the idea of we're trying to make the most of underutilized properties, right? We have a lot of people who are single, or it's just an older retired couple and they're living in a 4-bedroom home. They don't need to be taking care of a 4-bedroom home. But so the idea of promoting accessory dwelling units is really the idea of creating more naturally affordable units, right? So if people are not increasing the square footage of their home, they're not going to be creating a luxury seasonal unit, generally speaking. And again, if somebody, it's not for everyone, right? Like some people who want to run an inn are going to be more likely to do an Airbnb seasonal high-end rental, right? But there's a lot of people on Cape Cod who are just struggling to stay in their home, and creating an ADU for either a live-in healthcare worker. ADU is accessory dwelling unit. So it basically saying you're not allowed to add another bedroom, but you're because of septic, but you're allowed to create a little rental unit in your house. And that can help you stay in your home if you're older and on a fixed income. And there's square footage requirements that are just going to keep the price down, right? So those are, when you see ADU regulations and bylaws for the towns coming up, that's a good thing to support for what Andrea is saying. It's not subsidized housing, but it's very necessary for those people who have good jobs, but there's just no 1 and 2 bedrooms. The other thing that Housing Assistance did is a program we called Rent 365, and we are just marketing to seasonal homeowners under $450,000 worth of value, right? So not the high-end mansions that only get visited, twice a year, right? Like those guys are never going to rent you around to a local worker. We're not talking to them. We're talking to the people who have, inherited a family home and the kids no longer get them. We all have those vacant neighborhood houses in our neighborhoods. So we did an incentive program where they get to consult with a lawyer about how to become a landlord and just turn this into some passive income. So they get $1,000 incentive if they have a property that they put a new year-round lease on. And we support them with little education about how to become a landlord, how to do tenant selection, stuff like that. But we really had to target it towards, like I said, not the high value homes that are going to go Airbnb. Mm-hmm. There are those vacant homes that, the kids don't come anymore. And so that's what we're trying to do. So you kind of have to pull all the levers at once. These are just adding, but we did add 25 units per year for 2 years through this Rent 365, and that cost almost nothing,
Great.
So there's little things we can all do.
Yeah, Mary?
Yeah, so, right, so, and in the chat, you saw there was some comments about Barnstable's ADU program and how it was going really well when there was a staff person, but when the staff person left, it fizzled out. And I find that in Yarmouth, you know, we want to do home sharing. Some people don't want to put an ADU, and Yarmouth does allow you to rent out a room. But right away, we identified, you know, we would need some type of support for people, how to deal with that roommate. What's your legal obligation? Should you have a lease, you know, a written lease? So, and you can see that when HAC had staff people to help, they got 25 rental units online, you know? So it was like, it's almost like it's a housing service you need. To help owners of these properties become a property manager for the first time, and typically they're older. So this is like the first time they've done anything in their life experience like this, and they need some more support.
You know, I think we should all be thinking about this. You talk about pulling all the levers. I think of it as a mosaic. And it means we're putting these pieces in piece by piece by piece by piece. There's not like a magic bullet to solve this. But then when you step back from all those pieces, you start to see a picture. And that's what I feel like you guys are all talking about, that, you know, there's zoning, there's wastewater, there's the accessory dwelling units, there's building more housing, you know, there's money, all these things have to happen. And that's what we all have to get educated on so we can move them along. We have a question about how to address the issue that is a major challenge many folks face, which has to do with, you might make too little money to meet your family's expenses, and yet you might make too much to qualify for subsidized housing. And I know this is true for many government programs, like childcare suffers from the same exact thing. And I just wonder if folks have some ideas of how to deal with that issue, because it's a really big issue around for subsidized housing.
If I may.
Go ahead, Hilda.
I think I've brought up that before, which I find is a big setback for working families and people who are trying to stay here on the Cape. I think that boils down to a living wage that hasn't seen an increase in over 2 centuries. And so everything that is being offered through the state or whichever government agency is built off that number, which was like the last 30 years ago, where if you make 22,000 per year or 23,000 per year, you're qualified. There's nowhere under the sun right now anybody that lives on the Cape that make $20,000 can stay afloat or can afford to even live here, even if you're a single person. A 1-bedroom is $1,200 per month. A 2-bedroom is $1,800 per month, plus your utilities. So I think that needs to change. That's where the changes need to start, right there.
That's a really good example of the interconnectedness of these issues, that for advocating for a living wage has a very direct effect on housing. So that's a great example. Elaine, you were going to say something.
I'm not sure about this, but I do believe both the town of Provincetown and on Nantucket, they filed special legislation to up the percentage of income that could be allowed under some projects. I think on Nantucket, they went up to 200% of AMI, and Provincetown has a program up to 150% of AMI. So I don't know if that's a strategy that could be across the board or not, but I was, I thought that was a tool that they took advantage of to open the lanes we are looking at. As Hilda said, they're so narrow. If you don't fit into this lane, yeah, and there are many lanes, but there's still lanes, and we want to find a way to open that up more for, to have all levels of our workforce attain a stable home.
Thank you, guys. I have a question about, one person says, it's great that we're working on housing for our seasonal workers, But what about our year-round housing, especially for folks who are CNAs and others in the healthcare field who are caring for elderly and others? You know, we've sort of talked about this in general terms, but I don't know if there's anything specific that anybody wants to share related. I'm trying to be responsible and get all these questions out there. So anything else to add for that question? A lot of the things that you've talked about are relevant to this, but anything in addition?
Well, just to say that one of the benefits of supporting seasonal workers and having access to housing is that in theory, it takes a little bit of the pressure off of our year-round market, in theory. What I can say, I really work in the Lower Cape specifically, and for the first time ever, every single town on the Lower Cape has a site that they're working on for development or considering for development. And that's never happened before, so that's actually a really big deal, and they're of considerable scale. So I just want to put some hope out there and say that things really are changing. Not fast enough, but things definitely are changing.
Mm-hmm. There was another question about as land gets donated, one of our colleagues suggests that not only do we think about housing, but we also think about agricultural land. I know it's not exactly a question, but I wanted to, there's a lot of really great stuff in the chat, and I know we're going to put that up on our website later. So the comments that people have made, whether it be about running for Housing Authority office and other comments that are in there, will be out there. So thank you for that, Andrea. That was really helpful. There's a question about what can nonprofits, and just takes us in another direction, what can nonprofits and perhaps philanthropy leaders and like our foundations and some of our corporate foundations, what can they do to advocate and support housing? Can they do any kind of partnership things? Can they create collaborations? What do you suggest that other nonprofits might do at this moment in time to advance this issue, as well as our philanthropy and funding community?
Yeah.
Shauna?
Yeah, I'll jump in on that. Just to say that, again, I want to reiterate what Mary said. A lot of times, you know, about the housing services that's needed. Again, we're trying to pull so many different levers, and people are interested. There's a lot of support for housing, but people don't know what to do necessarily. And again, if we're trying to pull in people to build ADUs, or we're trying to have people do room shares or become landlords for the first time, we need to give them some support. And I find that it's difficult to raise money for staff, for the people to provide the support, right? Like, so a lot of foundations and individual donors want to give money for actual building, and that's fine because we need more building. You know what I mean? So I don't want to discourage people from giving to that, because that's great, and there's a lot of projects that need to get built. But I think supporting the services component of it and that public education component of it, and really creating more of a community movement for it, would be really helpful to have other organizations be a part of that, you know, and really working with people to engage them. I mean, that's one of the things I love about ADUs, is because it allows a homeowner to make the best use of the resource they have, but they're also like actively participating in the local economy, right? They've made a connection with another person in the community. They are now they're a business owner, and they have a stake in the success of the community as well, that you kind of just don't have when you're by yourself. So I think fostering those connections is really important as well. So I would say to foundations, please do still give to building, but also consider giving to community movements and education and services.
Great. We're nearing the end of the Q&A period, and soon our head of the Cape Women's Coalition will do some summarizing. But Andrea, I wanted to give you and your group here an opportunity to share any last words that maybe either haven't been said that you feel like it's just really important to highlight, or for the sake of emphasis, some closing words that you would want to leave folks with.
Yeah, well, I was thinking a lot about this trip that I took to Ireland. You know, last year I had the privilege of participating in this Massachusetts delegation to Ireland to learn about their housing system. And I think I was expecting to learn about a bunch of different, like, new and innovative solutions to our own housing crisis. But it turns out it's really not rocket science, right? They deal with it using a lot of the strategies that we just discussed today. But the difference is that they consider housing as a human right. And that means that they allocate the resources required to get the job done. So like Boston has more people in the entire country of Ireland, but Ireland allocates more than double the amount of money than the state does. And they also talk about climate change like it exists. So it's really amazing what they can accomplish with these really simple but powerful values. And it makes me wonder, you know, if they can do it, why can't we?
Great point. So Sue, I'd like to at this point introduce you, the chair of the Cape Women's Coalition, to wind us down. And thank you.
Hi, I'm Sue Rohrback. I'm the chair of the Cape Women's Coalition. What a great program, really. I learned a lot, and I want to really thank our moderator, Andrea, who not only moderated, but put together the bones of the program. And our wonderful panelists, thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us. Thanks to you, Andy Getzer, for handling the Q&A, and to Courtney Butler, our tech guru for the day, and Maggie French for their work in setting up today's program. I just wanted to quickly go over the calls to action that Andrea had put together, and a couple other things that I kind of added during the discussion. And this is from the slide that we saw earlier. Supporting things we can all do to help, supporting multifamily zoning by right, inclusionary zoning, accessory dwelling units, all at your town meeting, and just to support bringing them to your town meeting. And also the idea of a person who can, or an organization who can help be a support for housing, to draw people together, to give people information. I loved that idea. Support municipal water and sewer, support, excuse me, increased funding for housing, attend town meetings with friends. And that means your big town meeting, but it also can mean town committee meetings. And that is such a great place to get to know the people who are, you know, working directly for your town on these issues, and to make yourself heard. If there's a 5-person board and you're there, or you're there with a friend a few times, they can't help but hear you, and they'll listen. So visit your town website or contact the town clerk to find town meetings and committee meeting schedules. And the good ones to go to are planning board, anything on affordable housing, wastewater, the FinCom. They're the ones that decide where the money, you know, whether they support money for things before town meeting. And there are some others as well. Consider joining a town committee. You don't have to be an expert. You can learn as you go. Contact the town clerk to find out how you would get on one of these committee meetings. It also was mentioned in the question and answer period, the elected housing authority. I don't know about in your town, but in the town of Barnstable, sometimes they're looking for somebody to run for the housing authority. So that's another way. And just in general, you know, talk it up. The big issues are all interrelated. So speak out everywhere. I loved the analogy of a mosaic or a jigsaw puzzle, that small things are needed, and put all together, they can work and advance us on this. Just to mention, the housing choice legislation was brought up, and that would reduce the majority that at town meeting for zoning in all towns without local approval. And thanks to Laura Schufelt, she reminded me that it's in the state supplemental budget that they've been doing, and it should pass this week, which is a major accomplishment. And people have been working on that literally for years and years and years to make that happen. So don't get discouraged. Sometimes these things take a while. So now just some information. This program also streamed live on Facebook. You can watch it again or share it from Facebook or from our website. There'll also be information about the available resources on our website and also the chat questions and comments. The program will appear at the top of our Facebook page, and it should be up within the week. So share the program with other people that you think might be interested. Our next program will be the International Women's Day celebration. It won't be a breakfast this year, unfortunately, but it will be virtual and it will be awesome again. And it will be during the first week in March. Lots more information to follow. So I wanna sort of close by saying thank you again to everybody for this wonderful, wonderful program. And also to let those of you who are here know that we know that some of you have to leave, but we're gonna leave the Zoom open for conversation and additional questions for 10 or 15 minutes if people are interested. So thank you all so much for coming to this most informative program.